Welcome back to Buffa Love. This is another episode of the IBS Freedom Podcast where I'm in Buffalo, New York in a co-working office. So yet again, please don't judge me based on the background that you see. It's boring. Normally I'd have pretty paintings, but welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast, people. In today's video, episode, I guess. See, I'm in like my YouTube mindset right now, thinking that we're doing just video. We are going to be talking about something that afflicts almost all of us at some point in our life. I mean, unless you were raised by really, really crunchy parents, you're going to probably understand this episode. So, Amy, do you want to explain the title that we picked for today, which is Never Nourished?
Yeah. So I think that it's really encompassing this idea that most of us grew up, and maybe even through adulthood, we're eating a fairly standard American diet. So what does that typically mean? It means a lot of processed foods, usually not hitting vegetable and fruit goals, usually higher sugar, lower fiber. It tends to be sort of like the standard American diet, I would say. And again, I think it's usually depleted in micronutrients as well. Sometimes for some people, again, it can be a little bit too high calorically, like a lot of hyper palatable foods. But again, I think thinking like high sugar, low fiber, more processed, less like fresh, whole based foods, potentially micronutrient gaps from just being like more nutrient poor food sources. I always think growing up, just what I would typically eat. Now, it's funny because I had still considered myself a standard American kid. My parents did make us eat a vegetable and fruit at dinner each night. Now, what constituted a vegetable and fruit was very broad. Like orange juice was a fruit. I'm trying to think of some of the other weird ones. Like corn was definitely a vegetable. And again, they didn't care what we ate. We just had to eat a fruit or vegetable. And then we could eat anything else. Like once we ate the fruit and vegetable, it's like all bets are off. We could eat whatever we wanted. I still remember like almost most days eating, Little Debbie zebra cakes, oftentimes after school. I remember, I might have told you this before. I wrote about it in my book, which hopefully it stays in there. I think I'm going to leave it. But there was this mom that would work the snack stand at our school, and not all the time, but she was the only mom that gave me a hard time, which is amazing. But I would go to the snack stand, instead of getting like the hot lunch, I'd get 3 bags of Doritos and a slushie essentially. And what this one mom told me no. Mrs. Freaking, I still remember her. I'm still holding her grudge, but actually now I'm probably grateful for her to a degree. But every other day I still got the Doritos and slush. But it's like stuff like that makes you wonder like how you even survived childhood, and how you were reasonably healthy. It's kind of amazing how resilient you are as a kid. But yeah, I think it's interesting to look back at nutrition throughout your life, because you might have been able to survive periods of being on the standard American diet without negative consequences. But I do think as we kind of age, move through adulthood, we're much less resilient to deficiencies in the diet, and it can set you up for chronic issues long term. And things can get depleted over time too, so that can be tricky. So I think just for most of us, there's been this standard American elephant in the room for a long period of time. And it's interesting to think about like how much it could have affected your journey and actually been a very, very true root cause in gut issues and really other health issues too. Just even not feeling well across the board, like low energy, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think I want to just zoom in a little bit on this topic because I think a lot of times people go from standard American to restrictive and they never actually nourish. They're never nourished. They never kind of focus on the nutrition adequacy element and repleting things. It's much more of like restricting. And so they never have had a good baseline.
Yeah. And well, they've never given their body that foundation for health. Mm-hmm. And again, in an episode that will be forthcoming in a few weeks, we talked about this idea of rather than pushing yourself away from disease, to the best of our ability, we want to shift gears and focus on pulling ourselves towards health. Mm-hmm. Right. And like the net result can be somewhat similar, right? If you push yourself away from SIBO, then you think you're going to achieve gut health. But I think doing things to pull yourself towards health is I think it's a much better angle to take. It's more effective. It's easier mentally on you to do that. Right. But it's like pulling yourself towards health in this way of like actually nourishing yourself. And a lot of people have never done this. And before we get into the more academic part of this episode, I want to reciprocate. So you shared about the Little Debbie snack cakes and, orange juice counts as a fruit. So here's the ones that I grew up with. I was just telling my mother-in-law the other day that I grew up on I Can't Believe It's Not Butter Light. I can, for the record, I can in fact believe that it's not butter now that I'm older and I understand the difference.
Yes.
So the name is a little bit of an oxymoron. It's a lie. Actually, it's not even an oxymoron. It's a lie. So I grew up on I Can't Believe It's Not Butter Light, Miracle Whip Light, which is an atrocity. I think it should be outlawed now. Like just real mayonnaise or bust, man. That's come hell or high water. Real mayonnaise and real butter. But I was raised on these like low fat kind of options. We grew up in a divided household, actually. So my mom was a Coke drinker. My dad and I were Pepsi drinkers. But we made it work, so it's okay. We're all okay.
Can I stop you right there? Do you remember Surge?
Vaguely.
Okay.
Was it neon colored, kind of like Mountain Dew?
It was like green, and it was, I don't know if it was extra caffeine, but it was kind of like above Mountain Dew, I feel like caffeine wise.
Did you consume this?
I didn't like the taste. I never liked like the green. I don't know if it was just like I never liked like Mountain Dew or anything like that. I like Sprite. Like I definitely drank sodas growing up, but I definitely did not like it was Mountain Dew adjacent, but like Mountain Dew on crack. But I remember Surge being all the rage at the sleepovers and stuff.
Where you're supposed to sleep, as a side note. So probably don't want to consume a lot of caffeine. No, my best friend in high school loved Mountain Dew, and I cringed even then, and told her don't drink that stuff, but she did anyway. But we would stop at the gas station because she drove me to practice a lot, especially my senior year of high school, and we would stop at the same gas station, and no joke, before rowing and very strenuous activity, I would get one of those boxes, those little like preserved scary donuts that you get at gas stations, and there's two varieties. Powdered? The powdered sugar or the chocolate covered ones where the chocolate kind of looks like it's coated in wax. Yeah. One of those two varieties, I would get one of those and a Snapple. And I thought Snapple was a health food because there's like fruits and stuff, and it's like a nature scene on the bottle. So that was a health food. But yeah, Snapple. My family was big on like toaster strudels and Pop-Tarts and that sort of stuff for breakfast.
Pop-Tarts were very mainstream in my house. I remember my dad saying like how healthy they were. This is just so funny because I think they were low fat,
Oh yeah, and that was the theme at the time.
Who cares if they have 40 grams of sugar, but as long as they're low fat. But yeah, it's funny. Pop-Tarts are delicious, I will say, but they're not, I would not describe them as a health food.
I was more of a toaster strudel kind of gal myself.
I liked
but those were more
strudels.
expensive.
Yeah.
So we usually had Pop-Tarts, but on occasion we would get toaster strudels, and that was a good time.
Yeah. What was like your typical lunch in high school? This will be fun.
My usual, so not as bad as you, like the Doritos and a slushie. That's
okay. That was grade school.
notch.
I'll tell you about my high school
okay.
lunch.
Okay. High school, my usual was either a calzone. That was like the healthy lunch.
Ooh, okay.
Or I would get an order of mozzarella sticks and maybe like a Snapple or something to go with it.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I know you loved that Snapple. You felt so healthy.
I did. That Snapple. You know what though? I could give myself a pass because I fell for marketing. And, I think there might have been like 10% of your daily value of vitamin C or something, something on there. Yeah. I don't know. But the one that really cracks me up, and this didn't get popular until I was in college. And I think by that point, I kind of knew better enough. Vitamin water. Oh my God. When that came on the scene and everybody's like, oh, I'm so all healthy, the rage. Drinking my neon pink vitamin water. Oh, it has vitamins in it. I remember distinctly like being in college when those were kind of new. And I remember looking at the label and being like, it has like 33 grams of sugar in it. This is absolutely not good for you. And I wouldn't drink it, but yeah. So I feel like Snapple is at least like a notch above the vitamin water. I don't know. Yeah. Comment below. Am I being a Snapple snob? Hashtag Snapple snob.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's funny because I didn't eat breakfast growing up. I'd kind of rush out the door, wouldn't eat breakfast. This was in high school. I don't really think I ate breakfast in grade school either, which is really funny because as an adult, like I feel like breakfast is my favorite meal and I cannot, I have blood sugar stability issues. And I know I had blood sugar stability issues then because I remember always feeling tired after lunch. And I think, again, like my body was running on like adrenaline and cortisol up until lunchtime.
And Doritos.
And then I'd eat. Well, and so my lunch in high school would be, so this sounds so strange, but my high school would make like the best PB&Js. They would like the ratio of peanut butter to jelly was great. And then they'd put them in the fridge. So they were like crisp. Again, I'm not probably doing this justice, but they had very delicious PB&Js. So I'd get that every single day from the school lunch. And then I would get like a baked Lay's chips, like a bag of baked Lay's and a Powerade. That was like my typical lunch most days.
Powerade.
Yeah. Like a bottle of Powerade, baked Lay's, and PB&J.
I mean, at least you got something out of the peanut butter, if
That's
nothing
true.
else. And you maybe
That's
got some prebiotics from the wheat in the bread, maybe, possibly. I mean, and I was getting a little bit of calcium in the cheese from the mozzarella sticks, I guess, and a little bit of lycopene or something in the sauce, the marinara sauce. I don't know. I'm really grasping at straws here.
But I will say, like, our diets emphasize the standard American element, which is high sugar, low fiber,
typically high fat too.
Yeah, like, higher fat,
especially saturated fat and trans fats, like bad fats, if you want to label them that way.
So yeah, it's interesting. We both have lived this situation. Oh, yeah. And then again, I think even like through college, I actually ate much better in college. Like, not that I ate like amazing, but I feel like I ate a lot better, like where there was some fiber. I wasn't like as much of a sugar eater in college. Not that I didn't eat sugar, but again, I was under calorically, I think, for a decent chunk of my college, and still probably lower fiber, but I did a little bit better. But I was also binge drinking and drinking way too much. So it's like, okay, then your body gets depleted by the drinking and like the poor sleep and all that jazz. But then like that's kind of led me right into my gut stuff, because my gut stuff kind of came on in grad school and like right when I was exiting grad school. And again, I think a lot of it was majorly exacerbated by increasing my movement. So like the stress on my body and being kind of depleted nutritionally across so many years. So it's like there was kind of a breaking point that I hit that I think really exacerbated my gut stuff.
And I think we had mentioned this off camera before we started this episode, but you had mentioned this briefly, this idea of resiliency. And I'll say this. Youth generally gives you some bonus points in the resiliency department. But as you get older, you are not the young spring chicken that you once were, and you start hitting, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and it's just your body's not quite the same as it once was. And frankly, you now have years, if not decades, under your belt of beating up your body, not listening to your body, eating a nutrient deplete diet, like drinking, stress, you accumulate more bullshit and more baggage the longer you live on this planet. And so you can get away with this stuff much more often when you're young. Like, you could binge drink every weekend in college and still live to tell the tale. Or I remember one time my roommate and I were studying all night for a chemistry test, and we stayed up all night, pulled an all-nighter, and we ate an entire BJ's or Costco size bag of peanut M&Ms that night.
Yeah.
And we were absolutely delirious from the sleep deprivation and the M&Ms. And I remember at some point in the evening doing the dead bug yoga pose. And, I cannot imagine doing even one of those things now that I'm older.
Right.
Like staying up all night, absolutely not. No.
Right.
And eating probably more than half. Because, the friend was a coxswain, so she was very, very tiny, and I'm not tiny at all. So probably my 6-foot ass ate like 70% of that bag of M&Ms.
Right.
And she probably only had 30%, realistically. Right. But, eating the majority of a Costco-sized bag of peanut M&Ms in one span of time, like I also cannot imagine that now. I would have a gut ache for sure.
Right.
But I got away with it because I was, 18, 19 years old. I had youth on my side. I had some degree of resiliency, and I got away with it, abusing my body.
Yeah.
But we have less wiggle room for that the older we get. And oftentimes that's when people are receiving these diagnoses of IBS or SIBO or, IBD or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think too, you bust out into the world and you're like an adult and you have adult problems too that start to come up where you like have to make a living. And so I do think that thrown into the mix of probably, years of youth depleting your resilience and then real life adult problems, both of those colliding, I think is problematic. But
yeah. But if I may pause us here for one moment, not to be all doom and gloom, because yes, adult life has a lot of bullshit, and you acquire more bullshit and baggage as you go through life, and you have bills to pay and people to deal with and bosses to work for, etc. But it's okay, because when you're a grown-up, oftentimes you have at least a little bit of money on a credit card and you have a car. So you could do things like today, I drove my ass to Wegmans and I bought myself this fine sweatshirt that says Buffalo Love. And I did it on a whim. This is the beauty of adult life right here, right now. You could buy a sweatshirt like this when you're in the Wegmans and it all works out. But
we
anyway,
don't want any of that Buffa hate.
That's right. No, not Buffa
No
hate.
Buffa hate.
Never, ever. No, Buffalo Love.
Yeah. Well, and I think, to put this into like a population perspective, like with some statistics. So I told Nikki too, because I have some stats from my book, which again are really fascinating. So in terms of sugar, like intake of sugar, the average intake of sugar is 17 teaspoons a day for both adults and kids.
What?
Kids 2 to 19 and adults have the same intake. So that would equate to like around 71 grams a day on average.
That's nuts.
So like, again, some people are getting more than that because this is average.
This is a bell curve, folks. This is the middle.
So again, that's really high. And again, with things like sugar, I'm not the sugar police. I eat sugar. I think from my standpoint, it's about what percentage of the diet that's taking up. So if that's a huge percentage of the diet, you're not necessarily getting calories that have a lot of micronutrients in it. or even
It's
things like
empty calories, right?
Right. Empty calories. They taste good, and I think you could totally eat them sometimes, but on average, that's too high. I think, as Americans, our standard American diet needs to work on lowering sugar.
Yeah. And briefly, I'll just throw this in there. Michael Pollan has a great quote in one of his books, and I use it all the dang time. Treat treats as treats. Like Amy said, neither of us are the sugar police. We're not going to come out to your house and whack the brownie out of your hand anytime soon because we both eat sugar. Like when I was in Cincinnati visiting you, we went to get ice cream and we enjoyed that ice cream immensely. It was delicious. Yeah. I would go again in a heartbeat. So it's not that sugar is bad, but treat treats like treats.
Right.
As it suggests, is like you have it sometimes. It's not a daily thing. It's a relatively minor part of your diet, but you enjoy it and embrace it when you have the opportunity to have it, versus what a lot of people do is that they will have, they'll have a donut for breakfast and then they'll have a soda in the afternoon and they'll get like a mocha frappuccino latte unicorn sundae, whatever it is at Starbucks that has 900 grams of sugar in it. And that's like their self-care, their little treat at Starbucks. And then they'll have, a cupcake or a cookie or an ice cream or whatever for dessert after dinner. And it's a staple of their diet. It's a mainstay of their diet as opposed to being a treat. Right. That's totally the difference we're going for here.
Yeah. So again, I think sugar, typically sugar is probably going to be correlated with more processed foods too. So like less produce. The CDC has also found that only 10% of adults eat the recommended level of fruits and veggies. And for women, that is 1.5 cups of fruit and 2.5 cups of vegetables. So it's not a super high amount. And for men, that's 2 cups of fruits and 3.5 cups of vegetables. So yeah, we're not necessarily getting nutrient-dense produce in the diet as a population either. Now we can talk a little bit about fiber. Now we've mentioned this before. But fiber, just as bad. Average fiber is typically between 10 to 15 grams a day. The recommended is 25 to 38 grams. 25 for women, 38 grams for men. I know we've talked about this before, but there was a study with almost 15,000 people and only 9% of women and 5% of men meet the recommended fiber intakes. And I know we've talked about that 67% believe that they get enough fiber. So there's a huge gap in terms of thinking they're getting enough fiber and actually getting enough fiber.
And this is where doing some tracking at least once can really point you in the right direction. And we'll say it every episode until the cows come home, but I don't want to work with you and have you come to me and say, I think I get enough fiber.
Right.
As soon as I hear the words, I think I get enough blank, I'm like, no, forget it.
Right.
Put your money where your mouth is. Use the damn Chronometer app for 5 minutes a day and give me this data that we need, and then we'll talk. Because like you said, there was that one study. I think the breakdown was, it was 33, no, hold on, working backwards. 5% of people believe they're getting enough fiber, and they are. They're correct. Right. So I know I fall into that 5%. I know for sure I get enough fiber. I've tracked it enough times. I know my diet enough. I know I get enough fiber. I crush it. 62% of people believe that they're getting enough fiber, but they actually are not. So 62% of people are in denial.
Right.
And as the kids would say, they're delulu. Do you know that? Do you know? Are we trendy
I did.
Right now?
I recently used delulu with someone and they looked at me like I was insane, but I think it's such a fun word.
No, I think it's such a fun word. Like you.
Yes,
it is.
Right.
It is. So 62% of y'all are delulu, and you need to know. And then 33% of people were like, fuck it, I'm not getting enough fiber.
Right.
I know.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because do you remember the study that came out? You definitely do, because we've talked about it a million times. But the one where they found intestinal dysbiosis, small intestinal dysbiosis was linked to symptoms, but SIBO was not.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Friggin' work of art, that study.
Yeah. Great study. So they did like a pilot study at the end of that study where they took people that were eating high fiber, which is funny, the average was 25 grams.
So it was adequate.
Or maybe it was 21 grams. No, average intake before intervention was 25 grams. I have it written here. And this was considered high fiber. So like if you were a man, you were still getting under the recommendation, which is kind of funny. But again, this was a group of 16 people, so it was rather small, but super interesting because they dropped the fiber down to 9 grams for a week, and they increased the sugar. So like sugar increased, fiber decreased.
And the food was given to them, and they were under the direction of a dietitian for this part, right?
Yes. And so 50% of their carbs were simple sugars. They didn't really define what that meant, like whether it was just like more table sugar or fruit-based sugar. So I didn't get like a good read on that. But all 16 of the participants with the elevated sugar, the lowering of the fiber, developed symptoms, or developed new symptoms on a lower fiber diet, and 80% developed GI symptoms during the dietary intervention. And they resolved within a week of discontinuing that diet. So them lowering the fiber and the sugar caused GI symptoms, or lowering the fiber, increasing the sugar, caused them to have GI symptoms. And then when they discontinued it, the symptoms resolved. But this is mimicking the standard American diet, essentially, which is so fascinating.
And they only did it for 1 week.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love too, there was one other layer to that experiment that they did where they said they tested people for SIBO before and after. Yeah. They did a breath test, aspirate. I think they were doing aspirates, but they tested for SIBO, and they said 50% of these people who were eating the high fiber, AKA adequate fiber diet, 50% of them supposedly had SIBO. Right. But they were completely asymptomatic. They felt totally fine.
Right.
And then there was some handful of like a couple of people developed new SIBO, a couple of people like cured their SIBO during this dietary intervention where they did a week of the standard American diet. But whether or not you resolved SIBO or developed new SIBO or didn't change your SIBO status, none of that had any correlation to the symptoms that they developed. It was really purely just correlated with the transition to the standard American diet, high sugar, low fiber.
Right.
And then symptomatic improvement was associated with going back to their normal high fiber diet.
Right.
So it really, in the different phases of the study, they really poke a hole in the SIBO hypothesis and how directly linked it is to the symptoms that people care about. Because really, at the end of the day, people, you're not listening to this podcast because you deeply care about SIBO. You're listening to this podcast because you want to feel better. You want to feel good so you could do things in your life and eat food again. Like the label itself doesn't actually matter. And the label might not matter clinically, believe it or not. It might not correlate with your symptoms.
Yeah. So, and again, like the researchers go a little bit beyond too, because they actually looked at what was going on with the bacteria during the period of time when the participants were on the lower fiber, higher sugar intervention diet. And they found that it lowered bacterial diversity and it increased small intestinal permeability. So like AKA leaky gut. And these, again, seems to correlate with the symptom changes. They found that butyrate and acetate were lower, which, surprise, surprise, when you eat fiber, you make short-chain fatty acids like butyrate and acetate. And they again, write that this is their hypothesis, again, is based on the reduction of the fermentation products, that it probably plays a role in the leaky gut and issues that are coming from this style of diet. But yeah, it's super fat. It's like, it was one of the most interesting studies that I've read, just because, like you said, it pokes a hole in so many different issues. That SIBO is the driver of symptoms is wild. And then again, like, you would think lowering fiber could potentially help symptoms. But again, these people weren't symptomatic. They actually got symptoms from lowering fiber. So it's very interesting. But yeah, I think it's a really good study showing what maybe the standard American diet does to the gut.
Well, and we know that this isn't good for us, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, even people who are eating a standard American diet have some vague understanding from like the evening news. Because, right. They talk about new research every now and then, and we all kind of understand that it's bad for us, but we all do it anyway, or at least a lot of people do it anyway. And, it's kind of like if you tell a smoker, hey, smoking is bad for you, you should stop. Like, okay. Like, right. There's oftentimes people need more coaching and more hand-holding and more like help in the motivation department to really make these changes. And sugar in particular is really addictive. I think a lot of us have probably experienced where we were eating a relatively clean diet, or we did a cleanse or a Whole30, and then we start eating a little bit of sugar, and then it's like, ooh, now I crave it. And so you eat a little bit more, and now you crave it more. And it's the more sugar you eat, the more you crave it. And so it's really easy to get stuck in this place of, again, high sugar, high calorie, high fat, low fiber, low vitamin and mineral diet. And your poor body is like the tank is full, but not with the correct stuff. Right? Like instead of putting gasoline in your car to drive your car, maybe you're pouring in mineral oil. And like it kind of is loosely similar, and the tank is full, but it's not full of the correct stuff. So the car still doesn't really do what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. Did I ever tell you about the book, The Dorito Effect?
Maybe, but refresh my memory anyhow.
It's really interesting. And again, I haven't read it in a long time, but essentially the premise of the book is that like food additives and like the way we flavor foods hijacks the feedback loop in our body that tells us like, ooh, this flavor is associated with this nutrient. Because typically we will crave things like out in the wild, or like wild animals do this. Like if they have an infection, they start eating plants that they know kill the infection because they've gotten that feedback loop from the flavor of the food. It's really fascinating. And same thing, like they took kind of malnourished kids and put 35 foods in front of them. And the kids who are vitamin D deficient will drink cod liver oil until their vitamin D deficiency goes away, and then they'll stop. So it's like very fascinating that we have almost like a taste health benefit feedback loop. If that makes sense. So if we have a deficiency in something, a lot of times our body will like associate the flavor of that food with the vitamin or whatever we're missing and encourage us to eat more of that food. Yeah. So we have some of these systems with like our taste buds and the feedback loops. But flavors, so like the flavor on a Dorito, for an example, has like tomato and garlic and some of these things where like, ooh, our taste buds might have associated these with health benefits that aren't there. So like our body's like, oh, eat more, eat more, eat more. Like it kind of hijacks our body's ability to regulate health with taste. So it's a really interesting book. Go ahead.
There's another layer to that too. I remember, now this was many years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I was writing a blog post about aspartame. I actually just saw it pop up in my Facebook memory feed really recently.
Oh, wow.
And I was starting to do a dive on aspartame and artificial sweeteners. And I remember some of the research, one of the many issues that is painted with artificial or non-caloric sweeteners in general is that we are getting the sensory feedback that we just ate something sweet.
Right.
Which normally our brains and our guts would associate with like fruit or, a dessert type item. So we're getting this feedback that we just consumed sugar, but we're not actually consuming sugar. So you have all of the neurologic and hormonal and GI functioning, the cascade. It's like you set off the cascade for the digestion of sugar, but you actually did not consume sugar because you consumed something that's non-caloric or artificially sweetened. And so we're creating this disconnect between what our body thinks we're taking in versus what we actually are taking in. And it just goes back to this idea that I've mentioned before, that human beings have such a big ego. Collectively, we have such a big friggin' ego. We think we're so fucking smart that we can outsmart Mother Nature, we can outsmart physiology, and we can have our cake and eat it too. And we could just douse ourselves with, aspartame or sucralose or whatever it might be, and we could enjoy sweet tastes and have no negative repercussions from that. When really it might be more about moderating the sweet tasting things in our life and eating more of like the vegetables and the bitter foods and like the different colored foods. But yeah, that's one of many concerns with artificial sweeteners and non-caloric sweeteners, is that we're creating or deepening that disconnect.
Yeah, for sure. So again, like I think there's so many different layers to this, but yeah, I think in the context of how you're viewing your IBS or healing journey, I think you have to assess like potentially how long you could have been depleted in some of these areas. And then again, what you've done on top of that, potentially with restricting. Because again, I would say historically what I've seen is similar to my situation where, and similar to yours, because I know that you restricted heavily. You've come from a depleted place already, and then you further deplete it. And then you're kind of digging yourself deeper into this hole, and it's harder to come out of. So again, just understanding that working on your baseline nutrition could take some time, considering the history that you've had. You might need to replenish certain nutrients across time. And so again, it's one of those, it's just one of those things to consider along your journey of like, oof, how long have I actually been depleted? Yeah.
I think what we're dancing around is that you have to be patient with this process. There's very little that is truly going to heal you overnight or even in the span of a week or a month. But yeah, I'd like to give a couple of concrete examples. So you mentioned briefly my story. So looking back, again, growing up as a kid, I can't believe it's not Butter Light, Miracle Whip Light, Pop-Tarts, toaster strudels, Juicy Juice. Oh my God, we were such a big Juicy Juice family.
Oh my gosh.
Soda, Bear Claws, like you name it, pizza.
Do you ever drink Sunny D?
Oh, for sure.
Oh, yeah. I that was like the one thing I like. It hurt my teeth. It was so sweet. It coats your sweet. It makes your teeth squeaky somehow. I don't know what. I hated how it felt on my teeth, but I liked orange juice. But yeah, Sunny D was a bridge too far for me.
But anyhow, that's what I grew up with historically. Then I started caring. I started caring a little bit more about nutrition, like very loosely, when I went vegetarian at the age of 11. And I've told the story before, but literally my mom started working at Cornell, and there's a lot of hippie, crunchy vegan people who work at Cornell. Right. And she came home one day and was like, "Hey, Nick, I'm going to try to be a vegetarian. Do you want to do it with me?" And I was like, sure. And that was the decision. She gave up on it pretty quick. She says to this day that she craved blood. Meaning she was hella iron deficient and she was craving like beef and burgers and steak, and she just couldn't take it anymore, and she plowed her face into a steak. And I'm glad she did, for the record. But I stuck with it for 11 years. And, I look back and I'm like, I guarantee I wasn't getting enough protein. I think most of the time I wasn't getting enough B12 and zinc. Now, that being said, I thank my lucky stars that I was a lacto-pescatarian, meaning I ate eggs and dairy and seafood still.
Yeah.
So that was my saving grace. I was not a vegan. I wasn't even a strict vegetarian in the
Right.
sense that I did eat seafood. But, like, how often do you eat seafood? Not that frequently. So I would say most days I was probably still deficient in B12 and zinc. And iron and God knows what else. But so I had this 11-year span of restriction being a vegetarian. And then I started rowing and getting really competitive and going to college and rowing in college. And I remember in college, I was labeled as the team health nut because I did crazy things like I ate hummus.
Oh my God.
I know. I would, my mom would make bags of trail mix for me and she would ship it to Buffalo for me. And I would like stash it in my dorm room because my roommates would try to steal it because it was the most amazing trail mix you ever had in your life. But I would like have trail mix for a snack instead of a bag of chips or something. And I would put frozen vegetables, the mix that's like peas, little cubes
Green
of corn.
beans, carrots.
Yeah. And maybe corn. Yeah. Corn, bean, carrot. I would put frozen veggies in my pasta when I made my whole wheat pasta. I know, whole wheat pasta too. And people were like, whoa, crazy health nut girl.
Wow.
So anyway, I thought I was really, really healthy and I was told all the time, like, wow, you're so healthy, Nick. And so, but I was still restricting and I still probably wasn't eating enough of a lot of nutrients. And then I went to grad school where, like stress went through the roof. I started going to functional medicine seminars and sipping some of the Kool-Aid about gluten and dairy being evil and everybody has leaky gut. You need to heal your gut. And I started playing around with elimination diets. And again, just cutting things out of the diet, not trying to replace things. Right. So like I went gluten-free with no understanding that wheat is the number one prebiotic in the American diet. So I took away the one and only prebiotic I had. But no, the hummus. I guess I still had the hummus, thank God. But no, actually, I cut out hummus eventually too because I realized I couldn't do tahini anymore. So I cut out the 2 prebiotics I ever ate. And then I didn't make a huge effort to replace that in my diet. Yeah. And I was doing like a lot of salads and stuff. And I think it was after going gluten-free that a lot of my IBS-D started. And it's weird to think about. I wish I could go back in time and just observe the timeline play out to confirm what I think is true. But I seem to remember my gut being pretty fine until I started restricting. And then it got worse and worse and worse. And of course, I tried to restrict worse and worse. But the reality is I went from standard American diet to vegetarian, but still like more junk food and more heavier reliance on wheat and dairy and less so on vegetables and fruit than I probably ought to have. And probably a couple of nutritional deficiencies because I wasn't eating meat. And then I went into a high stress environment in grad school and started restricting my diet more. And then my gut went kerflooey. And it's like, oh, I guess that kind of makes sense. I went from one level of restriction to the next, to the next, to the next. And it wasn't until I started broadening my diet that I saw real progress and resiliency built again.
Right. Totally.
Yeah. And then I had shared with you briefly before we started recording, I had a guy in FODMAP Freedom, really, in this recent group we had. He came out to the Q&A and he was saying, I just want to tell you how better I'm doing and how amazing this has been. And he said what he realized when he went through the nutrition and the root cause modules was he had eaten a standard American diet all his life. And then he ate what he called the standard American college guy diet for college, meaning frozen pizza, ramen noodles, and beer. Right. And probably like Mountain Dew or something. And that's pretty much what he ate all through college. And that kind of like the tail end of college is when his tummy problems started to set in. And like high stress in college, et cetera. Right. And then he immediately went into the real world and was diagnosed with IBS and then eventually SIBO. And he was put on low FODMAP and told he had to starve the SIBO. And he was like, I just realized I was never nourished. Again, I went from standard American diet to college guy garbage diet. I developed IBS probably because of that and the stress of college. And then I immediately jumped into the world of like SIBO, restricting, killing, and antimicrobials and antibiotics, stripping me even further. And of course, I didn't feel better, and it all makes sense now. But he came out to the Q&A, and he's like, I'm actually learning how to cook for the first time in my entire life, and I'm getting really good at it, and I'm really enjoying cooking, and I really love cooking, and I love eating now because A, I could eat more things, and I feel better, but also like I understand the importance of this. And that was just such a cool thing to hear, that not only is he feeling better, but he's actually falling in love with cooking and preparing his food for the first time in his entire life.
Yeah. Like, it's wild. Yeah.
He didn't need an antimicrobial. He just needed to like eat healthier.
Right. And I think that people don't really think of diet, like their potential or the history of their dietary patterns as being a root causal factor, but it 100% is. And I think, again, people think of their dietary interventions, like you said, as being, oh, as long as I restrict, I'm going to get better. And it's like, no. We need to flip that on its head. You need to be nourished for maybe the first time ever in order to move forward. And again, I wish people were as open as your FODMAP Freedom student is to that idea. And I think more people are coming around to it the more we talk about it.
I think so. I think almost 200 episodes in, hopefully we're starting to have an effect on the ecosystem in this regard. But, I just thought of something too, another car metaphor. So I had mentioned, instead of putting gasoline in the tank, you're putting like mineral oil in the tank instead. Like you're close, but not quite there.
Right.
Another thought, and we could talk about this a little bit. Have you had people where their retort to you suggesting that they need nourishment is, well, I've been eating like this for X amount of time and I felt fine up until 2 years ago.
Right.
So clearly my diet didn't cause this. Like, we need to work on the SIBO. We need to work on the candida. And they use that as an argument. Like, oh, well, I felt fine eating like shit before, and therefore I can get away with eating like shit now, or this is not important. This is not what I need to focus on. And what I would say to that is, if you've ever driven a car, you're driving along and your low fuel light turns on. Do you have to get in the gas station immediately? No. You can get away with driving with the low fuel light for a while. Actually, I come from a family. I think there's two types of people in the world, Amy, and I'm going to ask which one you are. And I'm going to judge you. Okay. The one group of people in the world, they get below a quarter of the tank and they start to get twitchy and they have to gas up right away because they do not let their car go below a quarter of a tank. The other group of people make it a game, a gamble. It's exciting. We live for the adrenaline. You get the low empty, the empty signal on your car. You're like, ooh, I've got 30 miles to go. Let's roll the dice. And then you have the goal of rolling into that Costco on absolute fumes so that you can get maximum efficiency with your gasoline stops. Can you tell which one I am, by the way? I make a sport out of rolling it on fumes.
Yeah. I do as well.
And what about Armand? Is he like the yin to your yang?
No, I don't think he would push it very much. Or at least I haven't seen him push it very much. He's also very weird about, like, if we have to drive somewhere, he'll go and get gas and then come back and be like, we're ready. And I'm like, well, we could have gotten gas on the way.
On the way out. Yeah.
So that always cracks me up too.
That's kind of adorable. Yeah. I can't imagine he would push it much. My grandparents, they were a divided household in this regard. My grandmother was one of those people that, like, if she went below a half a tank, she would gas up and she would get, distraught. Right. My grandfather was the one who was like, oh, loved one, we've got 30 miles to go, easy. Right. And he'd roll in on fumes.
Right.
And I definitely took after him in that regard. But my point with this is that your car can run perfectly fine. And it looks like it's perfectly fine for some period of time after the low fuel light comes on. Does that mean you should keep going?
Right.
Past that 30-mile mark? Like, eventually you need to fuel the car. Or another car metaphor, for newer cars that have a light that comes on to tell you when to change your oil. Like, how often do you change oil? Like every 3,000 miles or 5,000 if it's synthetic, I guess. Okay, well, what if you drive your car 3,010 miles? Is your car going to spontaneously combust the moment you go over that line?
Right.
No, your car will appear to work perfectly fine with that same old nasty oil for a while, probably. But eventually it's going to fall apart if you keep driving it and you don't get your dang oil changed like a responsible adult. And, it's like, is there crud in the oil that you just can't see? Is there like friction between the car pieces? I don't know what they're called. I don't know. I'm at the limitation of my car knowledge, just for the record.
Okay.
But, like, is there like
hearing
friction?
You try to describe it.
Is there friction between the parts? Is there like crud and debris and gunk? Is the oil like thick and weird colored? Are you burning something that shouldn't be burned? There might be a lot of weird shit going on under the hood and you're not aware of it, but if you're a dum-dum, just like driving along with your old ass oil, like eventually that's going to bite you in the ass. So I feel like the people who are like, well, I ate this crappy diet before and I felt fine. Yeah, like I want to focus on hormones. I'm like, you're not convincing me of anything. We still need to nourish you. Get over it.
Well, I think there's a couple of brain lesions that could potentially be going on when individuals say that. One, I think it's really hard to go back in time and really assess how you were at that time. Like, I think we have just our memories are not that great. So like, I think sometimes when we try to like go back and connect dots, we can be led astray by our own bias. Like if we're really convinced this was the main trigger, we just really can't assess our memory that strongly. Like, I don't know. So I find it really hard sometimes when people are like trying to tell me this is how I was 2 years ago at this time. And like this is what's going on. And I'm like, well, we have no idea what your diet was like really. Or like, go ahead.
And keep in mind, remember that study, 5% of people believe they're getting enough fiber, and they actually are. 62% of people are delulu, and they think they're getting fiber, but they're not. So even if you have like the world's weirdest memory, where you remember for sure what you ate for lunch every day in college, like, oh, I always got this one pizza from Franco's or whatever it was. Your ability to assess the nutritional value of your meals is probably worse than you think it is. And I say this too. I confess, remember, Amy, years ago, I remember telling you, oh, my ferritin is a little bit lower than it should be. That's crazy because I get enough iron. Wow, that's weird. And then I went on Chronometer for the first time and I did tracking. And I vividly remember Marco Poloing you in a complete, utter state of shock and horror. And I was like, oh my God, I'm holding my phone in this example. Oh my God, I don't get enough iron. Oh my God, I've been living a lie. And I do this for a living. Like, I'm not a dietitian, but I think I know a thing or two about nutrition. And I had no fucking idea. I was way undershooting iron, and my brain's ability to assess the iron in my food was skewed. And I have book learning and like nutrition classes behind me. I can't imagine being a normal person and trying to ballpark how nutritious my diet is without tracking.
Well, I think what they're really saying a lot of times when they're like, that I did that, I was able to function with this crappy diet in the past, is like, oh, I'm not open to this conversation, or like, I don't think this is a big deal. Bingo. And it's like, okay, well, you're not, you have to be open to coaching, because we can kind of open your eyes to different blind spots that you have. And I think that that's the key, is most people, again, it's these blind spots that are preventing them from moving forward. And I think the nutritional piece and how nourished you are is such a blind spot.
I feel like it's a blind spot for some people. Like, I have had instances where I work with somebody and we find that they're under eating and they're like, whoa, I had no idea. I'm going to act on this right away. It's a really high percentage of people who either they already kind of knew something, or even when you bring it to their attention, they're in denial and they won't examine it. So another really classic example is stress. Like, I think a lot of people deep down have some understanding that stress negatively affects their body, and maybe they could do better managing their mental health and managing their stress.
Right.
But we've talked about this before, I think, that people will desperately avoid the thing that they actually need to work on.
Yeah.
They will avoid it at all costs. If your big thing is stress, you will do everything in your power to avoid the stress conversation. I guarantee you. And, it's almost like the harder you push away, the more I'm confirming that that's the thing you need to work on.
Right.
Right? Like if I bring up stress and the person is like, you're probably right. I could do better. I'm going to start a meditation class. Thank you for that. I'm like, maybe this will be good for you, but I don't know if I'm
right.
Maybe it's not. The people who are like, I'm totally not stressed. That's absurd. And you're basing this on old research. I'm like, ooh, okay. Hit the nail on the head. I see.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes too, to me, it's fair to a degree for someone to acknowledge that stress is a factor and that they're unwilling to change. Because again, you could still have a conversation around that of okay, but you probably won't make much gut progress. We can try to reduce symptoms and maybe help you maintain, but your baseline will always be a little off, or it won't be optimized if stress is in the picture. So I've had a few patients who are very high achievers, traveling all over the country all the time. And, I have this one lady in mind who's more constipation predominant, and she's traveling. She oftentimes cancels appointments because she is in between plane sessions, and she's a pilot, so she's flying all over the place. And it's ooh, okay, that could be a big factor, but she doesn't want to change her lifestyle, and I'm
if I worked my ass off to become an airplane pilot, I don't know if I want to change my job.
Well, and she loves doing it, but her circadian rhythms kind of get thrown off. There's a lot of stressors there. She can't really maintain a consistent diet. So there's things we can do to kind of help things along, but I just don't know if we could kind of get her baseline totally optimized. So the conversation then becomes okay, so you get constipated on certain trips. How do we manage that a little bit better without necessarily fixing the root of the root, if that makes sense, or completely fixing the root of the root, if that makes sense.
Well, it's a conversation of managing expectations, right?
Right. Managing expectations. That's a good
I think
analogy.
Everybody has the goal to get to perfect optimum health. And the reality is that just might not be attainable for everybody and the lifestyle that they're living. If if you're an airplane pilot and you're flying all over tarnation and staying up at odd hours and your circadian rhythm is getting whipped around like a yo-yo and your diet is all over the place, maybe we could get you 50% closer to what normal would be, but maybe you need to travel with some aloe or some L-glutamine or something to kind of keep yourself going. So there's going to be a combination of real healing and Band-Aids, and maybe that's okay.
And again, I think the point being, to me, at least we've had an honest conversation and an understanding of what the expectation is. It's not she's then saying, oh man, why aren't I 100% better? It's we have this understanding that there's potentially some stressors with just generally her lifestyle that, again, she enjoys and wants to continue doing. And so for her, again, the cons of eliminating that would be much greater than the pros of totally optimal gut function. So, and that's totally fair. I think, again, we're not necessarily here telling people how they definitely need to live or whatever. But, I think in the context of talking about changing diet and lifestyle things, if you can and you're open to coaching and just honest with where you're at, that's usually going to be most helpful for working with a provider, because it's hard.
Well,
it's hard when there's
honest with yourself too.
Right. Honest with yourself. Yep.
I think, even if you're not working with a provider, if you are in denial so deeply that you're not even having an honest conversation with yourself, that's problematic. And to your point, we've worked with people who are able to do this. And I had one recently. So I was talking with a student who just completed FODMAP Freedom, and she's a hoot. So one of the things that came up, she said, I love my wine and I'm not willing to give it up. I was like, okay. And she definitely overdoes it a bit. And we talked about it briefly, gently, because I know she's not open-minded to changing this, but I think she said she has like 12 ounces of white wine pretty much every night. And I was like, ooh, okay, that's what, two and a half servings every single night. Like that might be a little overkill. But one of the things for her is that after she finishes her gut journey, she wants to lose weight. So, I brought up, it's like, hey man, you do you. I get that you said you don't want to change this, but in the context of weight loss, you are consuming a lot of empty calories potentially, and you might just want to play with that and weigh the pros and cons of that. And that, that's totally up to you. If you want to increase your movement so that you can get away with having some empty calories, maybe that's okay.
Right.
But, she was very honest with me. She was on that call and she said, I love my wine and I'm not willing to give it up.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Versus,
Everyone
it was
has
interesting.
Has their bridge too far
thing.
Yeah.
There are things that we're all willing and not willing to do, and it's all right. I'm not here to judge that. But again, it's managing expectations. Right. Is it reasonable in this example to expect her to lose weight if she is consuming 12 ounces of wine every single night?
Right.
I don't know. It depends on a lot of other factors. Again, if she's exercising a ton and eating a really, really balanced, healthy diet aside from that wine, then maybe. If she's not dialing those things in 100% and she's drinking the wine, I don't know. I don't know if it's a reasonable expectation for her to lose weight.
Right.
But yeah, that's her journey. But, and I think to kind of segue us back over to the topic of the day, we did it again. We strayed. The standard American diet, I think the point of this episode, if I may, is that a lot of us, I would say the vast majority of us, have this root cause that's humming along in the background for a majority of our lives. And that kind of laid the foundation for our bodies and how we built our bodies even. How weird is that to think about? The building blocks that you built your body with were probably not the healthiest building blocks, right? Like my bones were apparently built on Juicy Juice and Pop-Tarts and God knows trail mix and God knows what. So it's, and I'm not
Little
saying
Debbie's
that to judge
built my bones.
Huh?
I said Little Debbie built my bones.
That's right. That's the quote for this episode. Little Debbie built my bones. If we didn't have a good title for this episode already, I would say we should change the title, but I really like the Never Nourished title. So we're going to leave it be. But it's, you described it earlier as an elephant in the room. And I think that's a really good way to look at it. And I think that it's so culturally pervasive and so culturally accepted to eat this way that a lot of people don't realize how much it's contributing.
Right.
And that's the really weird thing. It's almost like if you grow up in a family where every single person smokes cigarettes and then you start smoking cigarettes, because of course you would. And say you lived a weird life where every single human being you ever interacted with smoked cigarettes, and that was just normal for you, and then you were transplanted somewhere else where nobody smokes. That would be really startling. But the point is, if you try to tell somebody in that 100% of the population smokes village that I'm talking about, if you tell somebody, hey, you should quit smoking, they're going to think, no, that's not relevant. That's not important. What are you even talking about? Everybody does it. It's fine. I've been smoking for 15 years. I feel fine. Whatever.
Right.
And they're going to brush it off because it's so normalized and it's so acceptable to them. You kind of have to almost remove yourself from that for a moment and zoom out and see. And I feel like that's what it is with the standard American diet. It's so normal and it's so common for people to eat garbage and not get enough nutrients and not get enough fiber and overconsume alcohol and do these things that you get labeled the weirdo. You get labeled the health nut when you put frozen vegetables in your whole wheat pasta, or you get labeled the health weirdo when you eat hummus or something, or like you start exercising. But I think we have to kind of collectively, and one by one, we have to decide that this is important. This is affecting our body in a multitude of negative ways, and we are going to do something about it. It doesn't have to be overnight. You don't have to like commit to a Whole30 or a vegan cleanse diet for the rest of your days. You're allowed to eat processed foods. You're allowed to eat sugar. Just maybe don't make them a staple of your diet. That's all.
Yeah, I think probably some common, like just trying to achieve the goals recommended too. So, getting fruits and vegetables in, like I said, I think only, what was it, like 9% or something got the recommended fruits and vegetables. So like work on that, which would help fiber. So like getting fiber goals, potentially lowering added sugar to 25 grams a day, which is what's recommended by WHO. So like you could start kind of gradually working down and trying to achieve these metrics. But again, like it could be even just as simple as kind of eating more produce would probably help get you there. And limiting sugar and like slightly reducing processed foods would probably get you to a better place.
And I'll throw out a couple of things too. So we got to interview Sarah Ballantyne, formerly known as the Paleo Mom, on this podcast at the end of the year last year. So that episode posted, I think, on Christmas Day or the day after. And we've both been gradually reading her Nutrivore book, which is awesome. Like I really am enjoying it so far. And I've been recommending the Nutrivore website to people for a while now and really enjoying using that website as well. So if you haven't checked out Nutrivore, it's NUTRIVORE.com. And then the book is the same name. And the whole idea of this body of work for her is getting the nutrients you need from the food that you eat. So very in line with this topic today. But a couple of things. So she had a whole section of her book about what she calls ultra processed foods. So there are foods that are processed, but not egregiously so. So for example, white rice, right? They take off the outer part of the rice, they remove the bran, and they leave, what is it? The endosperm, I think, which is the white starchy part of the rice. So white rice is processed, but it's not ultra processed. You're not going to put it in the same category as a Pop-Tart, for example,
right?
Or a Little Debbie snack cake. That's different. But there's actually research on this topic that I thought was really interesting. So the data seems to indicate from her book that you can get away with eating ultra processed foods up to about 10% of your calories each day.
Right.
So if you think about it, I think that's very in line with the idea of treats as treats that I painted earlier from Michael Pollan. So if you're eating a 2,000 calorie per day diet, 10% of your calories would be about 200 calories. So you have 200 calories that you can allocate to Doritos, Sunny D, Dunkaroos, whatever it might be. But if you think about
we've gone straight 90s junk food.
Oh, for sure.
In this episode.
Absolutely.
Really deep,
hardcore. Snapple. Yeah.
Right.
But, if you think about what that serving size would look like, that's not very much.
Right.
Right. So you could do like 2 of those little wussy 100-calorie packs of Doritos.
Yeah.
Which would be what, like 15 Doritos total, maybe. Not a lot of Doritos. Or our household is addicted to the Trader Joe's dark chocolate peanut butter cups. They are far superior to Reese's. I don't want the Reese's Corporation coming after me for saying this, but they are far superior to Reese's or any other peanut butter cup I've ever tried. And we're all hooked on them. But if I remember correctly, I think that one of those little dark chocolate peanut butter cups from Trader Joe's is like 85 calories, I want to say. So I could have 2 of those little peanut butter cups per day. but I'd better be eating fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes and nuts and seeds and healthy fats and protein for the rest of my calories. So it's really, it's a very small portion. But like I said, when you interact with normal people and you see what people are typically eating, it's very different than that. They're eating, the cookies, the crackers, the rice cakes, the frozen, Stouffer's meals, the donuts, the vast majority of the American diet is ultra processed foods.
Right.
So we need to start shifting that ratio and get it closer to the 10% mark. And that's where you can really enjoy your treats, not feel guilty, not feel shame. You could enjoy them, but you're also not going to do anything deleterious to your health. And I have one more Nutrivore-inspired factoid to share, and that is that if you have listened to this whole episode, good for you, and you are thinking to yourself, yeah, but I don't like the taste of X. Oh, I don't like the taste of vegetables. I don't like the taste of fruit. What do I do then? Please, for the love of God, don't run out and get Juice Plus and think that some gummy bear is going to replace all your fruits and vegetables. That is the most bogus thing I might have ever heard. No. You still need to suck it up and actually eat the healthy stuff. But there was a section that I just read in the Nutrivore book not that long ago where she was talking about changing taste preferences. And scientifically speaking, research has shown that it can be done. It'll take a little bit of time. So I think she said in one study, when trying to develop a taste for a new fruit or vegetable, on average, I think it takes like 5 exposures for people to begin to like the thing. So if you've never liked green beans ever in your life, you might have to try green beans 5 times or 6 times before you really start to take a shine to them at all. But it can be done if you're persistent. And I'll throw this out there too. Some of this could be also learning how to cook. When I first met my husband, he told me point blank that he did not like Brussels sprouts. And I found out later he had only ever eaten Brussels sprouts at the Seneca Niagara Casino in Niagara Falls. And the casino buffet is good, but I remember going there with the Dineza family when we first started dating. And I remember being horrified by the boiled to death, mushy Brussels sprouts that they served on that buffet line. Gross. So, and for the record, my husband's family holds the Seneca Niagara Casino buffet on a pedestal. They think that is, and I mean, it is, I love a good buffet. Don't get me wrong.
God's country.
But it's put on a pedestal for sure. So here, he grew up thinking that was like the pinnacle of good eating. And if anybody's going to cook Brussels sprouts right, it's going to be the Seneca Niagara Casino buffet. And I came along and I showed him how to roast Brussels sprouts in the oven or cook them on on the stovetop. And now we all love Brussels sprouts in my family. But I had to show him how to cook them and make them taste good. So if you're trying to rewire your taste buds, it might take a few exposures, maybe half a dozen exposures to really start to change that. And also, you might need to learn how to prepare or cook the food to make it tasty. So don't give up. And interestingly, last thing I swear to God, because poor Amy probably has to pee. She's pregnant, people. She has to pee all the time, I bet. But she also said that out of all of the tastes that you try to rewire, the one that takes the longest is rewiring your taste for salt. So when people transition from a high salt to a lower salt diet, adjusting and acclimating and like resetting the threshold for what they deem to be an adequate level of salt for their food. I think she said for that one, it takes like 2 or 3 months to really recalibrate the salt taste specifically. But all of the other ones are quite a bit quicker than that.
Oh, nice.
So it can be done. You can eat healthier. You can pull yourself out of the standard American sad diet rut that we all find ourselves in at some point or another. Again, unless you had the world's crunchiest parents. So I hope that this episode inspired nutritional change. Wouldn't you say, oh, dietitian friend of mine?
Yes, for sure. I'm glad we covered this finally.
Yeah, good topic. Well, go forth, eat Brussels sprouts, just don't boil them, and we will see you right back here for the IBS Freedom Podcast.